Quick intros. I'm Justin DeBrabant. I'm the Chief Product Officer at ActionIQ. We are a customer data platform. I'll talk a little bit about what that means. My background is actually in databases and infrastructure. Initially, I started my career in academia, did a PhD in databases at Brown and MIT, so I'm a recovering academic. Spent a number of years consulting, spent some misguided years at hedge funds and finance. Before joining ActionIQ, actually, I was employee number one, so I've been there almost 10 years now. We've been a company since 2014.
Cool, and I'm Caleb Tretrick. I'm on the marketing technology and operations team at Atlassian. My background has kind of been in the traditional marketing operations space. So I spent the early parts of my career working with some of those tools and platforms, and then kind of as I saw the industry and marketing in general moving closer and closer to data within their organizations, I've kind of altered my career a bit and kind of moved more into that role where most of my day today is working with our business teams, so those more traditionally in marketing, product marketing, things like that. Then also different technical teams within Atlassian, so engineering, IT, and really making sure that the solutions and tools and technology that those teams are supporting the business with are meeting the needs of the business, and then conversely, making sure that our business teams are able to communicate what they need to those technical teams, kind of create that symbiotic relationship between the two. So a little bit about Atlassian. If you're not familiar, Atlassian was founded in 2002 with the kind of core product of Jira. So if you've heard of Jira, that's Atlassian. Originally created as a tool to help engineering teams manage bugs and kind of fix that, go through that process in their development cycles. 2 years after that, we launched Confluence as a document management solution, and kind of back in the days when wikis were really popular within organizations. And then over the last 20 so years, the organization has grown and developed a number of products over that period of time. I think now we have 17 or so. It changes, I feel like, week to week, especially with AI and all the fun stuff that everybody's coming out with these days. I'm also trying to keep up with that internally. A little bit about kind of our footprint as we kind of get into the conversation today. When it comes to managing data and using that data to support marketing and campaign efforts and targeting through the organization, we're dealing with roughly 10 terabytes of data. There's a lot more than that in general, but kind of what we distill down into what marketing is using. We've got over 300 million individuals that we're looking to contact. It could be customers, prospects, anything in between that. And then, yeah, like I said, products are always coming out, so we're always kind of juggling that balance of who has what products and what products are coming up and all that fun stuff.
And I think what's cool about your data is it's a combination of kind of the traditional marketing engagement data, but also what users are doing in your products, and you have that visibility, which is really cool.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so a lot of the data we deal with is not just who you are, what company you work for, but also what are the products you have, what are the states of those licenses in, and then as the organization has done a pretty heavy shift to cloud over the last couple of years, obviously that opens up a lot of new opportunities in terms of data, in terms of how our customers are using our products, what they're doing, what they're not doing, and using that information to be able to craft experiences with our products, whether it's onboarding when you're starting to use something for the first time, or maybe you haven't used a product in a while and we want to get you back into that product and have you start using it again. So pretty much everything in between.
Awesome. I assume people know less about ActionIQ than do Atlassian, so I'll got a little bit of an overview of what we do and who we are. So we are a VC-backed tech company in the customer data platform space, CDP for short. If you're familiar with CDP, there's probably 10 different definitions if I pulled this room, so we'll try to kind of distill that down in the overview today. We're backed by Sequoia and Andreessen in March, and we work with large enterprise brands like Atlassian, very enterprise focused, so mostly global 2000 brands, retail, media, tech, especially B2B tech, and financial services tends to be our focus, so a lot of big banks, wealth management, et cetera. So I say that because the context of kind of some of the challenges we're trying to solve for and the solutions that we've built to solve those challenges are very much through the lens of large enterprises, global brands, et cetera. And simply put, our mission is to transform customer experiences with the power of data. When the company first started, all of the early people, our CEO had a data background, had a database company called Aster Data, sold that to Teradata. My background in data, our CTO's background was in data infrastructure at Facebook. All of us were coming from the data infrastructure space. And what we found was this was kind of at the tail end of what I would call big data 1.0, like data lakes and Hadoop and these things being deployed. there was a lot of technology that was being deployed for the sake of collecting data and storing data, but there wasn't ever really the right conversations being had about how that data was going to actually drive meaningful results for the business. I think it was the right intuition on the tech side of the organization that, hey, this data is going to be valuable, we're going to need it at some point. But you go and talk to the business teams, marketing and CX, and they were saying, well, we can't get at the data. We're going to solve this through people and processes. We're going to have to hire a bunch of analysts to write custom SQL every time marketing wants to pull a list. And so we felt like there was a lot of untapped potential in the kind of the value of the data that was sitting there and what the revenue teams were actually able to do with it. So we started out to solve this problem. What were the challenges in doing that? So one, this is 10 years ago, right? The data was still very much disconnected. We're all here for Databricks, and I'm sure you all have great lake houses that you're building on top of your data to really unify that, but that wasn't the case 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was much more of integrating an enterprise data warehouse and EDW that was maybe on-prem, maybe you had a marketing data mart, and more than likely, a lot of the data that was valuable was actually still sitting in the applications or ecosystems that generated that data. So you had digital clickstream data in Adobe or Google, you had email data, click opens in your ESP, none of that was in the cloud data warehouse or the marketing data mart. So you had to kind of by necessity start to integrate that data together. You had to define kind of the notion of a customer and create that kind of identity layer on top of that. And then eventually, once you've done that, you've defined that and created that customer 360, then you can really generate the value through better targeting and orchestration and build applications that really empowered the business to really take advantage of that data. And that's what we did. That was the first iteration of the CDP. We would connect to the various data sources. I mean, I'm sure you all have seen some version of this butterfly diagram. We would connect to the various data sources. We would ingest them into our infrastructure. We are a Spark-based platform. I worked on Spark pre-Databricks in academia. We took Spark, we built it for our use cases. We're migrating more and more of that to Databricks now. Managing custom Spark is hard. But we would ingest it into our platform across these different sources, ETL the data into our CDP, and then we essentially acted as the infrastructure layer for which our application sat on top of. So we were essentially taking a copy of the data, building this customer 360, managing the infrastructure around that, and then building applications that the end users and marketing teams could use to then orchestrate customer experiences across all the downstream channels. So an important kind of few pieces here. We weren't really in the business of generating new data. We do have a tag, we do have an SDK, but really we were about being able to connect and integrate the data that already existed in this enterprise data ecosystem. There was a ton of that data. We didn't want to just create another silo. We were never about the final mile delivery. So we're not an ESP, we're not a mobile push platform. We integrate across kind of a best of breed stack there. So, and most of our customers were integrated across 10 to 15 or more channels, all the way from kind of acquisition on the paid media side to email to mobile app to direct mail for our retailers. So we kind of integrate across that full ecosystem, including inbound things like website and call center, et cetera. So this was kind of the state of ActionIQ, what we built for the first 5 years of the company. Again, kind of this managed infrastructure on which these applications for the business could sit on top and help democratize the data. But we're here at a Databricks conference for a reason. A lot's changed. What we started to see happening in the market is we saw a critical maturity of cloud data warehouses. So in the early days of CDPs, we were often selling to marketing teams. We were helping them kind of consolidate their data strategy, but there wasn't a Databricks lakehouse. There wasn't a Snowflake or BigQuery or Redshift under the hood. Really, the data was still all over the place. Now, though, enterprises are at the kind of tail end of a big cloud data warehouse migration or lakehouse migration where you're investing over the last couple of years and migrating to whatever systems you had, consolidating that into your cloud data warehouse. And from our perspective, doing that kind of data integration, infrastructure management was always kind of a means to an end. We didn't want to be a data infrastructure company. We were kind of forced to because it didn't exist internally. But really the value was generated through the applications and the interfaces on top of that data. So the last couple of years, what we've done is we've really shifted towards, in our terms, what we call a composable architecture. So what is a composable architecture? Really simply put, it's trying to embrace the infrastructure investments that enterprises are making in their data. So if you've built a lakehouse, we should be able to sit on top of that lakehouse, not copy the data, but be able to essentially leave the data where it is and run these queries, these audience, these orchestration queries, where the data lives in your infrastructure and not ever need to copy the data out. We should be able to do that in an agnostic way. I know we're at a Databricks conference, but we don't just work with Databricks. We're agnostic to the underlying cloud data warehouse, whether it be Databricks, Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift. We even do connect to on-prem systems as well. So being able to connect and integrate the data wherever it is, not need to copy it out. And then the net result of that is we become kind of a stable no-code UI on top of a potentially complex data infrastructure environment. And even as that environment changes, as you all invest more in Databricks and migrate from more on-prem to Databricks, the interface that the business sees in terms of the audiences that they're able to build, the campaigns that they're able to build, those can be stable over time, right? They don't need to know or care where the data lives. We handle all that complexity. We abstract away the fact that there's some data in an on-prem database or a marketing data mart and some data in Databricks. And actually, in fact, that's changing over time on a table-by-table basis. ActionIQ is kind of this abstraction layer between the messiness of the infrastructure and the applications that the business teams are using to tap into that data. So we've gone all in towards composability. We started this journey about 3 or 4 years ago. It's crazy to see how much the industry has shifted. 3 years ago, we were managing all of our clients' data. Now, 80% of our new customers are completely composable. We're sitting on top of their cloud data warehouse or lakehouse. So we've seen a complete shift in that direction.
Cool. So I'm going to kind of give a bit of a background on some of our stack evolution over the last couple of years and how that kind of marries with some of the points that Justin just walked through. So to give you guys a little bit of background, just to kind of set the stage. So Atlassian, like most organizations, kind of starts in one place and then matures over time, and so does our stack that needs to support that and the architecture that's kind of underlying that. So in the early days, right, Atlassian was very much a product-led growth company. It still is today. But over time, as the company grew, we really transitioned into that B2C enterprise, supporting enterprises, supporting those types of businesses. And that's a very different motion, and there's a lot of different data involved. Right? You're not selling as much to individual people, but potentially buying teams. You're engaging with high-level executives in those organizations to build those relationships and create that customer relationship. And so that really made, I think, a big shift in our overall data footprint and kind of what we needed to work with and how we needed to support that. And then over time, we had some really great engineering teams that we still work with and have heavily day over day today start to build out some of those sources of truth, right? So what Justin just mentioned, those C360s. Can we look at some of our data and understand, all right, who are the addressable people that we can talk to today? Are they a customer? Are they not a customer? What products do they own? How long have they owned those products? Different things like that. And so as that evolved over time, and a lot of that's really contained directly within Databricks today, we had teams spun up that were really focused on supporting the marketing organization. So these were analysts. These are people who were very familiar with the data. And through that transition, what we noticed is that those teams started to become a bit of a bottleneck for the organization, right? Marketers didn't have direct access to data. It was in some cases really complicated within Databricks, right? There's thousands of tables, thousands of ways that you could look at some of this data outside of some of those sources of truth. And so that really kind of led us down the path of looking at CDPs in general and ActionIQ specifically, because we wanted to put some of that power back in the hands of our marketers and give them some of the flexibility to work with those analyst teams when they needed to, but then also to have some of those capabilities themselves. And then, like Justin just mentioned, in the early days, a lot of it was focused on taking our data, taking the data we needed, lifting that, shifting that, bringing it into ActionIQ, and then having that available for people to build audiences off of and build campaigns to engage our customers and prospects. But now, as the industry has changed, we're also really trying to embrace that idea of composability and kind of building that scale into our organization. So it's something that we're really right in the middle of today, and we're really excited about kind of where that's going to go.
And I mean, I think your journey at Atlassian mirrors exactly what we saw in the industry as a whole,
Yeah.
where in the early days it was teams that built something custom in-house on top of their data warehouse, right? And usually it was like a SQL interface, or you fill in the template for a SQL, and you train marketers to be somewhat technical and be able to tweak the SQL script. Or you have a drop down of like 15 pre-populated audiences, and if you want a new audience, like the technical team has to write the SQL behind the scenes, and then it populates the drop down. So we saw a lot of that early on. And then you standardize on a CDP as kind of the interface for that, and then you move towards this more composable architecture. So I think we've seen this exact trend more broadly across our customer base as well.
Yeah, so just to expand on that a little bit more, some other challenges that we were really dealing with was, on the scale side, not just in terms of quantity of data, there's a lot of data, right, but then also the complexity of it. There's the B to B to C aspect of our customers makes things a little more complicated, where you could go, get Jira on your own, get Confluence on your own. Maybe you're using that for some personal use cases. Then you also have it through your organization, or in some cases, organizations, there's different teams that don't talk to each other, that have products separately. And so there's a lot of different nuances of how some of that data could be structured. And so we did have a lot of challenges around the scale of that, around being able to push that data into the downstream platforms for our marketers. It led to inefficient data management, right? And then from like a use case perspective, as our marketing teams have grown and matured over the course of time, they really are leaning into that idea of omnichannel orchestrating experiences for our customers in multiple surfaces, right? So really that idea of you're able to get an email that has a message, and then you're able to log into the product and see something that either complements that message or reinforces that message. And maybe you get an ad, while you're browsing the web to kind of further reinforce that, right? So trying to take that experience and put it across multiple surfaces for people at one point in time was really a challenge for us. And at the time, the best we could really do was like launch an audience to each of those channels at the same time and kind of hope that people saw the message, when we wanted them to. But that was definitely a challenge for us. And then also, governance, right? As people are just writing right on top of Databricks, there were, I can't tell you how many temp tables I saw in queries and things like that, right? And it's just, everybody's moving so fast. And so, we were also having some challenges with making sure that we were always leveraging the right data, or that when marketers were looking at things that they kind of could trust that, hey, this is what I need, this is the right stuff, and I can use this to build my campaign and get something out the door for what I need to do.
Yeah, and that's something we definitely see. I mean, obviously governance is a hot topic, and I'm sure you all are painfully familiar with a lot of that. But when you're doing these more technical solutions lower in the stack, like custom SQL and tables and things to kind of power these marketing teams, what ends up happening is you might have something that syntactically is correct, but semantically it's wrong, right? It's difficult to understand the notion of an active customer, right? And if there's 10 different definitions all buried in SQL, then really you're actually targeting completely different across these different channels and strategies, right? And so it's about what data you're using, but also what meaning and semantics you're applying to that data, and you need to have the right tools in place to make sure that if everybody in the business team is targeting an emailable user, you have a consistent definition of that. If everybody's targeting active customer in a certain product license, there's a consistent definition of that. And that's difficult to do if it's being recreated ad hoc every single time.
Yeah, so on top of that, I mentioned earlier the idea of putting the power back in the hands of our marketers. And so what we really looked for when we were going down this road, or the beginning of it, was we wanted to be able to take some of those analysts that were writing effectively queries to build audiences to then ship campaigns, give them the opportunity to further their career and kind of do some of the things they wanted to do instead of just building audiences all day long. And so kind of with that goal and with what our marketing teams were telling us was, how do we get something that can allow those folks to have that self-serve access, right? We really wanted to move away from a structure where we had to centralize audience creation through a team that ultimately became a bottleneck, where sometimes marketers were either waiting 4 weeks for an audience, or depending on business priorities, right? They may not even get an audience, right? They might get pushed below the line, and then they don't have that support that they need. And so I'd say out of all of these, maybe this one and the bend our data strategy and investment, or bend data to our strategy investments is, this was one of the most critical pieces for us in having a platform that allows us to put certain controls in place, right, where it's not the Wild West. Marketers aren't creating and launching campaigns, fully on their own, but there's checks and balances on that piece of it. But when it comes to building audiences, exploring data, if a marketer is saying, hey, I have an idea for a way to engage some of our customers, how many people even fit the definition of what I'm going after, broadly speaking, right? Am I designing some crazy campaign for 100 people, or is it tens of thousands of people, right? And giving them some of the capabilities to just do some of that discovery on their own was a big part. And so over the last couple of years, that's kind of where we've moved and transitioned our strategy to the point where now today we have marketers in the platform building audiences. They're also learning about our data and getting some of that exposure to, I would say further their ability to think of how they can engage their customers, right? Sometimes with some of this data, it's really complicated, or when you talk about cloud user data and what people are doing within a product, a lot of people just don't even know what's possible or what is able to be tracked and therefore then used in order to engage customers after the fact. And so I think we've seen a lot of that too, where some of our teams have been able to broaden their audiences, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But so those were like a couple of the really, really big things for us that we saw were that next evolution in allowing our marketing teams to further their scale and be able to engage our customers in the way that they wanted to.
And it's easy to take that for granted, but I mean, if you think about the way the world worked before, where you would file a Jira ticket, no pun intended, but this is what we heard, like, the marketing teams would file a Jira ticket, they would throw it over the wall to the analytics or ops teams, and then they would write custom SQL, they would pull a list, and that whole process would take 4 weeks. I mean, how do you iterate and be agile with data if a turnaround to a simple audience query takes weeks? And yet this is what we hear from every single one of our customers. And weeks can be generous if you're talking to large institutions. Sometimes it can be much longer. And what we're talking about is enabling the business teams to be able to tap into that data on the order of minutes, right? You have a drag and drop interface. You can ask questions of your data. How much more agile, how much more data-driven could you be if you could get answers to these audiences, get counts on the order of seconds versus being completely kind of beholden to another team lower in the stack? So it's easy to take this as like, okay, that makes sense. Everybody should have data access with governance, right? But it does completely transform kind of the way the organization operates and ultimately what you're able to do and leverage with that data. And I would argue that for the technical teams that were the interface into the data before, it's a level up in their job too, because they're no longer servicing these kind of ad hoc requests from marketing. They're not just writing custom SQL scripts. They're actually focused on the data and the integration and kind of the next level capabilities to be able to make more value out of that data versus just kind of being list pulls.
Yeah, that's kind of really how we're shifting those teams to now. Those analysts that were traditionally writing those queries, they're actually going up the stream within the marketing organization, and they're actually in the coming quarters looking to start partnering with marketing teams up front and help them ideate and kind of be that data expert on the planning side, right? To kind of help influence that process to the point where when it gets to the teams that need to support those asks and ultimately get the job done, they're not being asked for the impossible, things aren't coming out of left field. It just kind of creates a lot more synergy through that relationship. And then, frankly, it's what those folks have, at least in our organization, have really wanted to do with their career and their role and kind of move into that advisory role and not just write SQL all day long, even though they love doing that too, right? And so that's been a big part of that transformation for us, and it's still ongoing, but it's been exciting to see how that's materialized.
Yeah, it's like analytics to data science, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Definitely where you want to be going.
You're good.
And one last thing on this one, actually, we didn't really touch on it, but the other trend that's happening, less on the infrastructure side, but more in kind of the CX side of things, is we've all heard of cookies going away, third-party cookies going away, and what that means. Whether you realize it or not, the whole paid media ecosystem, digital marketing, was very, very reliant on third-party cookies for the last 2 decades, right? It was kind of this cheap fuel that allowed better targeting advertising, even independent of your first-party data. I didn't have to have a first-party data strategy for digital marketing. All I had to do is go to my DMP, go to these kind of third-party data providers and say, I want to target people who look like this, right? And I could use their data to do that. And that data was collected in maybe questionable ways, but it worked. And it was kind of a cheap sugar that made everything kind of keep running. But those are going away, right? And so what all these organizations are doing is shifting to a first-party data-driven strategy, even on the acquisition and anonymous and digital marketing side of things. So, users engage with your websites, with your products, potentially in an anonymous way. How do you build insights into those customers, who they're targeting, and then take those insights and retarget or activate or prospect across this broad digital marketing ecosystem? If you don't have insights into your first-party data, you're literally going to be flying blind. So that's what's also interesting, is that there's a whole new pillar of use cases that have now been opened up for first-party data to drive more value, because acquisition is shifting away from third-party to first-party data. And it's not going to be just a lift and shift, right? It's a fundamentally different strategy with different technologies and different approaches. It's not like cookies are being replaced with kind of a drop-in mirror replacement. But again, it's shifting toward first-party data. That's very clear. And then for you all in the room that are driving that kind of infrastructure and first-party data strategy, to me, it seems like it's a chance to drive even more value from that data through the organization, right? It's not just about the retention use cases.
Cool, and then I'll just go through this really briefly, but I think a couple of the key themes that Justin commented on that's really, I think, part of our focus as we move forward is when we think about this idea of composability, just the idea of reducing data copy, continuing to improve that governance and really driving that cost efficiency are definitely top of mind for our teams. Today when we take data out of Databricks, pack it up, put it in a CSV, drop it in S3, have ActionIQ consume it, and then rematerialize it in the platform, right? That's just like a lot of room for error. Every time data hops from one place to the next, there's just more opportunities for things to go wrong or for just lack of insight in general. And so as we think about this idea that's kind of been coming to market of composability and just connecting to the data right where it's at, like this is really where our focus is going, so that we can have the platform just look at what's in Databricks. And then also it makes the data more timely, right? We're not copying data and then basically creating a version of it that's slowly decaying in terms of relevancy over time every 24 hours, but we can just look at what's there in Databricks today and then use that to power a campaign or power an audience. And then I think the cost piece is fairly obvious, like the idea of having to lift and shift data, having someone else manage it and host it for you, all the infrastructure are there. We're already doing it ourselves in Databricks to begin with, right? And so that's been a big kind of focus for our teams as that transformation goes. But I think the most exciting piece is really just seeing the data where it's at and connecting to it directly. And then when it comes time to make changes or make updates, it's made in Databricks, and then within 30 minutes it's available on the platform, right? Versus having to go through the whole pipeline adjustment process and get 4 teams involved in that. It's definitely kind of part of our vision of making, on the data side, our technical teams a lot more nimble as marketing asks come up that maybe we haven't supported before. Just that ability to really quickly iterate on the data that is in the platform is going to be really kind of that linchpin for how we're going to continue to grow over the next couple of years when it comes to those campaign efforts.
And also as you make investments in your data ecosystem, typically what we see is you invest in a cloud data warehouse and it's more of kind of a batch process, right? Like it updates every couple hours or every 24 hours. But everybody's moving towards more operational use cases, more streaming, more real-time data. And what's great about composability is that as you make those infrastructure improvements and data becomes more real-time, whether it's through live tables or structured streaming, those changes are immediately available in the CDP because you're populating that data. You don't need to figure out how to copy it faster. You don't need to figure out how to update it faster. It's just immediately available. So you're always dealing with the freshest data, and you can immediately take advantage of those infrastructure investments that you're making on the Databricks side. Okay, I'll go through this quickly. Feel free to take pictures. I just really quickly kind of going through more of kind of the technical implementation. This is kind of the implementation details of when we talk about Composable. There's a couple different ways that the industry, I think, has implemented this that each have their pros and cons, and I'll talk through them. First of all, if you've heard the concept ReverseETL, I don't know why this is considered composable in any way, shape, or form. The whole concept of this is just copying data out of the cloud data warehouse into the applications, but I think it's been, ETL is into the data warehouse, ReverseETL is out of the data warehouse. But for better or for worse, it's usually been included in these kind of composable CDP discussions, probably more out of confusion than anything else. The other one that is getting a lot of traction, you see everybody, all the major cloud data warehouses supporting this now is increasingly data sharing, right? Data sharing is great, assuming kind of you have the same technology and in your right region and all the requirements are met. the Cloud Data Warehouse kind of abstracts away the messiness of copying and sharing data and makes it easy to collaborate across different ecosystems. Awesome, right? So data sharing is a way to implement this composable CDP. The third here, 3A, is the query pushdown. In this case, you're compiling a query, you're pushing it down to the data warehouse. The results that you're getting back are basically the counts of the audiences in the CDP case, the counts of the audiences or the list of users that qualify. So you're never really forced to copy the data back. In the query pushdown case, the difference between that and the query federation is query pushdown is assuming there is a single source and you're not doing really any post-processing. So it's kind of it's kind of an idealistic view of, yes, all your data is perfectly integrated, fantastic, it's all in one place, you can push every query down, you don't need to do any post-processing.
Always the case.
Always the case, yeah. 3B, I would say, is kind of the more realistic real-world approach, at least for enterprises, and we call this query federation. This is what we support, and really query federation is, we built a layer to essentially take an audience, break it down into subqueries. Each of those subqueries knows where the source of data is that we're trying to query. We push down those queries independently to potentially multiple sources of data. So it could be multiple Databricks instances across different regions. It could be multiple different vendor technologies. It could be a combination of Databricks and on-prem vendors. The idea is that the data is still segmented across different technologies. We get the results back, which are the lists of user IDs, and then we actually do the post-processing to bring those lists of user IDs back together and present them as a coherent audience. When we talk with clients now, they want to get to 3A from an architecture standpoint where like all the data's in one place. In practice, the data's never in one place. I've been part of these data lake deployments for a very long time. There's always new data, new models to build, new things to integrate, new sources to integrate. So I think 3B is kind of the real world, more practical version of the stack where you're able to connect across multiple sources if need be. And that's exactly what ActionIQ supports with Databricks and the other vendors in the cloud data warehouse space. Again, quickly, an architecture of what that looks like. In our platform, we have a combination of views, which are essentially kind of non-materialized views into the cloud data warehouse. So we connect to Unity Catalog or Hive Metastore. We map over these views. We're not copying any of the data over. Simultaneously, we could be ingesting some data sources, right? And those are manifested as tables in the platform. So we're essentially creating this customer data store that includes data that we've ingested, maybe because it's not in the cloud data warehouse yet, and views on top of the cloud data warehouse. Now, as an end user, a marketing team builds an audience on that, we're compiling those queries down. We know exactly where the data lives. We federate those queries, and we do that post-processing. They don't ever need to know or care where the data lives, where the queries are running. And what's great about this is data infrastructure is not a point in time, right? It's an evolution. And as you evolve your infrastructure strategy and move maybe more and more data to the lakehouse, what you can do is actually swap these tables from data that's managed in ActionIQ to being a table that is a view on top of your Databricks lakehouse. And all the objects on top of that, the customer 360, the audiences and campaigns, assuming the same data is there and it's in the same schema, don't need to migrate, right? You can seamlessly transition from one source to the other without needing to disrupt the business with a big migration. And so that's what I talked about earlier when you need kind of a stable abstraction layer. As your infrastructure strategy evolves over time, you don't want to always disrupt the business operations on top of that. You need something that stays consistent view to the business, and all that complexity is managed by that middle layer, in this case, this composable CDP. Again, a lot of our new customers are moving towards this composable architecture. The reality is, once we often start deploying them, they actually are more in this hybrid composable category where we're connecting to 2 or 3 different sources. And we're also seeing customers that are intentionally connecting to multiple sources because they might have one cloud data warehouse for one team and one set of use cases, and then they have another cloud data warehouse for other teams, another set of use cases, and we're the abstraction layer across that. Again, in large enterprises, there's a lot of complexity that you have to manage. So.
Cool. Yeah, so I'll go over this real quick here, but I want to talk about a couple of impacts and some of the wins that we've seen from our teams as we've kind of moved into this model and framework is like I mentioned earlier, the reducing the need to rely on those pipelines to shift our data into the platform, but just give it right to the teams when they need it, when they want it. And what's also helped is those marketing teams make those changes on the fly at scale as they need to. And so I had one person come up to me months ago who said, hey, just want to let you know, like, hey, I'm in ActionIQ. Somebody on my team needed to tweak an audience. They just needed to make a very minor change. And what took me 10 minutes to do in the platform would have taken 4 weeks in terms of internal teams, tickets, processes, all that kind of stuff, right? And so little things like that we're trying to kind of give back to those teams to drive that scale. And that's where some of that speed to market piece comes into play. And then I think also on the cost side, for us, some of the benefits we've seen have also been in the context of taking those vast amounts of data that are in the governed structure that we need them to be and actually push those to downstream channels to support some of the things those teams need to do. So for an example of that is historically, before the platform was in place, our teams had a hard time with the volume of data that we needed to send, sending it to ad networks to make sure that we could, at scale, suppress our customers from some of our acquisition-based ad campaigns. And so that was one of the first things we did with the platform, where we could take tens of millions of individuals, push them down, and then those teams could use that data, and they were able to save a pretty significant amount of money on the first couple of months of doing that. And not only were they saving money, right, but they're able to take that money and reinvest it into other ad strategies, ad campaigns that are already producing results for their teams. So it's not even all just like cost at a platform level, but just even cost with how teams are going to market, how they're looking to run their campaigns and engage those customers. And so through all this, we've also been able to be nimble where like I mentioned earlier, everybody's coming out with AI products. Product development is still kind of going crazy in general in the market. And as our teams are developing new products, there's beta programs, wait lists, things like that are always introducing new data that hasn't existed in some way, shape, or form into the Databricks environment. And so with some of this structure in place, we can very quickly and easily get those data sets into the platform and make them available for those teams. Because they can't wait 4 weeks to launch a campaign for people that are registering for the beta or for the different ways that they're continuing to develop that new product. So really, it's been a mix of that efficiency, that data accessibility, and then like I said earlier, marketers are able to create better campaigns because they have more insight and access to the data that's at their disposal to do those kinds of things. And it's also, I think, furthered that relationship between our marketing teams and our engineering teams.
Yeah, and on the marketing ROI side, I mean, 7% might seem okay. It's a single-digit percent. If you're not on the revenue side of the organization, you might not realize how much your teams spend on paid media. Yeah. I won't comment on Atlassian, and I don't know, but I know some of our large enterprises, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on paid media spend. So moving the needle and improving that spend, reducing the cost of acquisition 5 to 10%, it not only pays for the Composable CDP many times over, but also pays for the Databricks investments that you're making, right? You're saving tens of millions of dollars of annualized. So yes, the operational pieces, the agility pieces are fantastic, but there's just so much revenue to either make or save in these large enterprises when you really are able to leverage the data effectively.
Cool. And then I think just a couple learnings that I wanted to just have everybody take away. I think of as I look back on the last couple of years and where we were versus where we are now is, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. I think that was something that Atlassian had struggled with prior to what we've done in the last couple of years, is like trying to find the perfect solution, get the data in the perfect spot. Everything needs to be perfect before we really try to use it all. And I think having this mentality just allowed all the teams involved across marketing, IT, engineering, to just know that like nothing's going to be perfect, but as long as we're continuing to make progress and unlocking some of these things for these teams, like that's what we're all trying to do at the end of the day. And it's never going to be done. Like data is always changing. It's always evolving. There's new stuff every day. That's a big one for us. And then I think another one was talking with those teams constantly, right? So I have the unique position of being able to connect with both business teams and tech teams, but continuing to bring those teams together to have those conversations. They're not happening in silos. Tech teams aren't thinking of, oh, what's this great thing we can go build, and then marketing sitting over here like, we need this thing instead. And there was a lot of that going on before this, and so that's something that we've had ActionIQ for 2 years now, over 2 years now, and it's something we still do on a weekly basis, where some of these key stakeholders get together, talk about what's going on in the platform, what are the teams needing, what's coming up from a data perspective that we need to start planning for. It just kind of gives us all the ability to have some better foresight into what's happening. And then I think the last thing here is really about measurement. And A lot of times, marketing organizations have a hard time measuring their impact in one way or another, especially in the B2B world. And so as we embarked on this journey, we also wanted to make sure that the things we're doing, like yes, efficiency is great and saving people time is great, and the marketers that are doing this themselves love that. But then when their boss comes and says, hey, like, how are we impacting the business? How are we driving revenue? How are we growing product adoption? Things like that. Those are sometimes harder conversations to kind of get back to the data around. And so that's been kind of our focus as well over the last year or so is figuring out what do those different teams care about? What are they looking to measure? And then how can we tie the work that we're doing around audience building, campaigning, and making that more scalable for our marketers to its impact on on the bottom line of the business. And we're certainly, it's the same way it is with data. Like we're not there yet, but it's always a evolving conversation, and we've made a lot of progress over the last couple of years. So.
And with that, we've left exactly no time for Q&A. So we will not be taking questions, but we can hang out in the back of the room or outside if anybody wants to chat through any of this. Thanks all for joining.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming first thing in the morning.